When the Allman Brothers band broke out of Macon, Georgia in the late 1960s, it was as the standard bearers of a new movement known as Southern rock. Though they remained an underground act, their distinctive sound and white-hot live shows, led by the unique guitar playing of Duane Allman, had built a dedicated fan base.
Their music was now identifiably their sound, unique from anyone else. And I saw them, and I was brought to tears. It was just so magical. I think of the top 10 shows, rock and roll shows I've ever seen in my life, the Allman Brothers got at least 3 or 4 of those.
What sets them apart is their music is indescribable. It has elements of everything, but what do you call Jessica? What do you call In Memory of Elizabeth Reed? They're clearly very jazz influenced, but they're not jazz songs proper. The Allman Brothers could play Stormy Monday, they could play with Albert King, B.B. King, Bobby Bland, and sound great. More so, I would say, than just about any other band of their era, but it's very limiting to call them a blues band. And that's why the Allman Brothers are the Allman Brothers. They're a singular musical entity.
The sudden death of Duane in 1971 came at a time when the band were reaching their peak and had honed their musicianship to the point where they were ready to carry the quality of their concerts into their studio recordings.
It's just breathtaking in the studio. The outtakes were just magic. I mean, they weren't used because there was something with a little more magic, but they were great.
But as the Allmans started a new chapter in their story, the road ahead would be fraught with difficulty, a tale of success, loss, dissolution, and the eventual triumph of rock and roll's greatest survivors.
When I met them in 1983, they were all struggling. Yet at a certain point, their legacy was gone. These days, you hear nothing about Cher, you hear nothing about Scooter Herring, you hear nothing about how bitter the breakup was in 1976. What you hear is how that band was probably the greatest live band in the history of rock.
They built themselves back up to a point where today they're bigger than they ever were.
In the winter of 1971, the Allman Brothers were a band devastated by the loss of their talismanic lead guitarist, Duane Allman. Tragically killed in a motorcycle accident on October the 29th, Duane had founded the group and raised it in his image. It had been the clarity of Duane's vision that had set the Allmans on an unstoppable rise to success, and his peerless musicianship that had attracted legions of fans. In the emotionally fraught aftermath of Duane's death, the band was forced to confront the question of whether they would be able to carry on without him.
Duane's death just knocked the air out of all of us. And that whole weekend was just kind of a daze. One of my jobs was to take the family members and friends to view Duane in the casket. And boy, that was heart-wrenching, because not only my grief, but sharing everybody else's grief. And then we had the funeral, which was really uplifting. That's when that was my first realization that everything was going to be all right, because the band played, the music was there, and we came out of that funeral, if you can believe it, uplifted. We had a meeting the week after the funeral, and everybody agreed unanimously that there was no way the band would break up, that we would continue on. And within a couple of weeks, we were back in New York working. And I remember the very first date without Duane, to see that empty spot on the stage was really strange. And there was obviously a hole in the music, but The band was still there, the music was still there, and everybody was determined to go on because they knew that that's what Duane would want.
The band was going to go and start playing about 3 or 4 weeks after Duane had died. At first I was surprised, but then I thought, well, this is what Duane would want them to do. That's what always got us going was music. We played the music, everyone felt good, they got along, and things were happening. And so that's the only thing they could do.
The people on the street that were out there in the street, and my peers, the people that were promotion people and, you know, with Columbia and RCA and all those labels back then that were doing well, ABC, they said, man, the band's, Duane Allman is the band. I mean, you know, he's the, look, here, he is the band. Well, I actually heard more than, I'm a songwriter myself, so I like the lyrics, you know, and Greg Allman is the best white blues singer ever, period. I mean, you know, people say Joe Cocker and Rod Stewart, and no, best blues singer, Greg Allman. So I'm kind of saying, well, if he can carry it, if Greg can carry it, then yeah, let's, you know, put him on the road, let's go.
But whether Greg could carry it remained an open question. In trying to stabilize their career, the Allman Brothers first had to address the leadership vacuum created by Duane's death, and bassist Berry Oakley initially stepped in to try to fill the void.
After Duane passed away, it was impossible to expect Greg to become what he wasn't and what he had never been. You know, he was the only Allman still left in the Allman Brothers band, and people naturally assumed he was the leader, but you know, that was just something he was not capable of doing. Berry Oakley really tried to step up and assume Duane's leadership mantle. And he really wasn't suited for it. He didn't have the personality for it. Plus, Berry was really getting lost in drugs and alcohol and just didn't have the strength to pull that off.
Berry Oakley really died the same day Duane did. He walked around for a year, but the death of Duane just took every bit of his strength and soul out of him. He just spiraled downhill. So